And here we are on the top of Peches Amid Beis. If there are two witnesses against two witnesses, then this is a suffix Isur. So why did Rav say lo teitze? I mean, every time he has a relationship, he incurs another chiyuv of Hashem Tolu. Rav Sheshes goes sheniseis liechad meideh. She's married to one of the two witnesses who testified that her husband died. And as far as that aid is concerned, he doesn't have a suffix. And therefore, he doesn't have to bring an Hashem Tolu. So the Gemara asks, he goofa be Hashem Tolu comment, but what about her? She still has an Hashem Tolu. She still has a doubt whether her husband died or not. Because in front of her, there are two kitei edim, and they contradict one or the other. So why did Rav Paskin Shalot say? The Gemara says, Biomeris Barili, that she says that she knows for sure that this is her husband. In other words, she knows that her husband died, and this guy is not her husband because she can recognize her husband. And she knows which kind of birthmarks he has and so forth and so on. So she has no doubt about having a relationship and getting married to another man, and therefore she doesn't have to bring it. So the Gemara asks, Ihachi, 3 lines down from the top, if Rav is talking about a case when he said lo teitze, if she is claiming barilu, and she's being married, and she's marrying one of the two witnesses, is my Lememar, why did Rav have to teach me this din? I mean, what's the chiddush here? We already derived this in Ksubis on Daf Chav Beis Amid Beis, that if two witnesses testify that her husband died, two witnesses that her husband did not die, then she should not get married. But if she gets married, lo teitze. And the Gemara explains that there it's a case of niseis lechad meideha v'toenis baril. So what is Rav adding to what we know already in the sugya in Ksubis? Now you might say, well, afilu Rabbi Menachem Berebi, who says that in niseis teitze lo kamer el shabo edim, meaning all 4 edim, both 2 sets of edim came. And there were 2 edim say that her husband died, 2 edim say that her husband alive, yachach niseis, and then she got married. And since at the time she got married, she was already in a suffix yitzurachis each, is therefore teitze. Aval, but in a case where first the 2 edim came and testified that her husband died, v'niseis, and she got married. Ve'achakach, only after she got married. Bo edim, 2 witnesses came to testify that her husband is still alive. Lo Amar Rabbi Nachman did not say that teitze in that case, because when she got married, she did so beheaded. There were only 2 edim that said that her husband died at that time. Is therefore, even according to Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Yossi, we still have the question, what did Rav add here when he said lo teitze? Now the Gemara clarifies and presents the machlok shin chacham Rabbi Nachman, the sign we learned in the case of an isha shalach bailam dinas hayam. Shnayim omer meis. 2 say that they can testify that her husband died and she can't marry. Ushnayim omer lo meis. 2 testified that her husband is still alive and therefore she's not allowed to get married. Another case. Shnayim omer nisgasha. 2 edim testify that she received a get. Ushnayim omer lo nisgasha. She never received a get and she's not allowed to get married. In all these cases, we're going to say, let's call this faked noraisa, meaning we're not going to rely on chazaka because there are 2 edim who say that her husband died, or 2 edim say that she got a get. And trei kameo, we always believe 2 edim. And Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Yossi, it all depends. Teitze, but amos I nemo teitze. When Bisman Shabo Edim, the testimony came in that lo meis bailo. V'achach niseis, and against the Edis, she went ahead and she got married. Avol niseis, if first, before she got married, the second pair of Edim came in to say that her husband died. V'achach bo Edim, after she got married. Then the second pair of Edim came to testify that her husband's still alive. Hareza lo teitze. So once again, we're back to that question: what did Rav be machadish when he said lo teitze? And the Gemara answers: Ki kama Rav nami bisman shebo edim yachach nises. Ulafu came into Rabbi Menachem. Rav was just paskening like the Chachamim against Rabbi Nachum, to the effect that even if she went out and she got married after the Eidim testified that her husband is still alive, so that the suffix here of trey was chal already before she got married. Nevertheless, if she went ahead and get married, lo teitzi b'bayla sheni, against Rabbi Nachum, he could give me another possible answer to this question that Rav was talking about our Mishnah, Emasai Teitze, that's only Nisei Salpi Erecha. Nisei Salpi Shnei Eidim, then even though her husband came around, or two witnesses came around to say that her husband's alive, Lo Teitze. Taima, the reason why Lo Teitze is because of Niseis, the Achach Bo Eidim, only because she got married after the first two Eidim testified that her husband died. And now Rav is reflecting the Shita of Menachem. Avol Bo Eidim, if the testimony that came in, two witnesses that her husband is still alive, Yakach Nises, and then she got married, is Rav is going to hold Teitzei, Keman Kerabi Menachem Rabbi Yosef. So to summarize, we have two ways of understanding Rav. According to the first tradition, Rav was holding and passing like the Chacham against Rabbi Nachum, and according to the second tradition, he was passing like Rabbi Nachum. Masiv Rava raises the following objection to Rav from a brisa that says, Minayin Shim Lo Ratza, if the Kohen does not want to separate himself from Tuma, which he's enjoined from going into a graveyard, or from Noshim Psulos that he wants to marry, Dafno, we beat him up and we force him to be porish from Tuma and to divorce his wife that he's not allowed to be married to. Talmud Lomar, we know this because the pasuk says, "V'ki dashto, ki es lechem elokecha umakriv." We have to be mekadishim bechol korcha, even with beating him up. So the one now clarifies, Heichi Dami, what's the case of the Kohen who violates an Isur Nesu and he's not allowed to get married? And the Brisa says in such a case, we force him to divorce his wife, Elam, if it's going to be a case. Where two of them came and testified that her husband died. She went ahead and got married to a Kohen and she was licensed to do so. Now two of them come in and they testify that her husband was alive at the time that she got married. And if she had a relationship with another man after Adam came and testified that her husband's still alive, she becomes a zona, and she's psula from kahuna. Again, we have a suffix Isur Kohen. Delo nisei sliach meidea. And the Kohen that she's marrying is not one of her two witnesses. She doesn't know for sure that her husband died. Is tzricha l'meimed de dafno? Do we need this chiddush of the brisa that we beat up the Kohen and we force him to be motzi, and we have a suffix zona? He might be violating an Isur zona. It must be a case where she's married to one of the eight, and she claims barely she knows that her husband died. Then two Adam came in and testified that her original first husband is alive, and he was alive at the time of the Nesuah. And the Kohen refuses to divorce her. Ukitani defano. It must be that in this case, we're going to force him to divorce his wife because she's a suffix dona alma. And now we can disprove Rav. Mafkinale mine. We bust up the marriage from her first husband, even though she was married to one of the two witnesses. And she's claiming barili. We bust up the marriage from the second husband. And that's against Rav, who says that if she marries one of the Eidim and she's claiming barili, that lo teitze, and the Gemara says Isur Kahuna shiny. So the first, the Gemara is going to give a number of answers. The first answer is that we are more machmir, the Chacham are more machmir in the case of a Kohen. They're not going to rely on the edus of a Kohen together with another witness and a Hatainis Bari against two Eidim that are testifying just the opposite, that her husband is still alive. So you can't derive any conclusions from a Chiyuv Kohen that we obligate him to divorce his wife through other cases. Chacham made a special takana. It's like my law should be yuchs. Viboy saying a new interpretation of the word dafno. It doesn't mean that we beat him up and force him to divorce his wife, because we're not talking about a case where she was married to one of the witnesses and she's claiming bari. Umay dafno be'edin. Before she married the Kohen, and there's a mitzvah v'kidashto, Bezdin are obligated to work overtime and to seek out witnesses who would testify that her husband is still alive and contradict the Eidim Harishonim that testify that her husband died. And all this is that she shouldn't marry a woman. Again, if he's already married, like he married one of the Eidim and she's still in his bari, is lo teitze. Ibois Ema, another answer, the brisa that says him lo rotza kohen dafno is talking about a case of kishe bo edin. Two witnesses came in to testify that her husband is alive and be machish the two edin that testify that her husband died. The achakach nises, and then she got married. And Rabbi Nachum, Rabbi Yossi, that since she got married illegally after the Eidim came and testified that her husband is still alive is Teitze. And Rav Paskins, as we saw going to one Lichna, like Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi. Rav Ashi Omer, Rav Ashi has a whole nother twist on interpreting Rav. My lo Teitze, what did lo Teitze that Rav meant, which we understood to mean that we're not going to break up the marriage to the Sheni? Lo Teitze me'atera rishon. What it means is she can remarry her first husband. Actually, she doesn't have to remarry him, but she's muteres lebaila rishon. And lo teitze me'atera rishon. It means when her husband comes back from Medina Sayyam and he's alive and well, and she has to break up the marriage with the Sheni, she can marry, so to speak, or resume the marriage with the Rishon. So what does that mean? Even though she relied on one witness who testified that her husband died, and you and I would think that she therefore deserves a knas, because apparently she wasn't medayekes, and therefore she would not be allowed to resume her relationship with her original and rightful husband. No, here we're not going to introduce a knas. Kevin shesomchal shnei edim sheidu shemeis baila for hoisa nusa. So again, according to Rav Ashi, Rav is talking about a case where she relied on two Eidim. So when do we have a knas and she's not allowed to resume her relationship with the original husband? That's when she relied on one Eid. If when she deserves a knas, why did you rely on one Eid? You should have checked it out. But if, and this is going to be Rav Ashi's interpretation of Rav is addressing a case where she relied on two Eidim, not just one Eid, is then she's considered an anusa. And therefore, we're not going to impose a knas, and she could resume her marriage with her first husband. So the Gemara asks on Rav Ashi, Amra Rav Chadasibna, the Snan Rav in a different context already taught me this halacha. Our Mishnah records the sheet of Rav Shimon that Nises, if she got married to the Sheni based on the two witnesses that testified that her husband died, and this is Shalom B'Rshus Bezdin because we don't need a heter from Bezdin if there are two witnesses. And now her husband comes back and he's alive and well. Muteres lachsabov yova Rav Huna Marav hachi ilchasa. So why is Rav repeating himself? And the Gemara says chada michlala dechaberta it. Enachinami, both dinim are identical. So what does it mean? Chada michlala dechaberta itmar. Rav apparently said it in one context, and then we derived it in a different context. The same exact din. Now the Mishnah says that if they told her that her husband died and she got married, and then her husband shows up again, when do we say that she has to break up her second marriage? She's not contradicting the witnesses who testified that this is her husband. If she says this is not my husband, lo teitze, she doesn't have to terminate a relationship with the second husband. So the Gemara asks, "B'mayas kinon, what is the edus that the Mishnah is referring to about which rule says that if she contradicts the edim lo teitze, if there are two witnesses, is ki machash to le'ma'ave? How could she be machish two witnesses? Why would Shmuel say lo teitze? Ella, it must be bechat that there's only one witness. And he's testifying, shemeis baila. I'm sorry. There's one witness who's testifying that this is baila. This is our husband. He's alive and well. Here's where Shmuel says that imakashto lo teitze. He says, time of the makashto hashaspa teitze. Again, if she contradicts the aide who testifies that this is her husband alive and well, then lo teitze. But what about a case of shaska? She doesn't contradict the aide who testifies that this is her husband, then the implication is teitze. She has to bust up the marriage with the sheni. Even though, again, there's one witness who testifies that her husband died and she's allowed to get married. So the Gemara asks, why teitze? She had an aide, and we relied on this aide that testifies that her husband died. Not only that, we have a principle of ula, kol makom shemina bo Torah eid echad harei kan shnayim. So when he is matir by saying meis bailach, we believe like two witnesses. Now another aide comes in and says, well, this guy is her husband. She says nothing. Is you're going to tell me teitze? His testimony is one against two, because we're applying the principle of ula that kol makom etc. is harei kan shnayim, and therefore ein dvar shel echad makom shnayim klum. When this single witness testifies that her husband died, he's believed like two eidim. She can get married based on that testimony. And therefore the question arises, why is it that if one witness testified that her husband died, then ein dvar shel echad makom shnayim. When the other witness says that her husband's alive, how could he be machish the shnayim, the two witnesses that testify that her husband is dead? and therefore she got married based on that one single witness who's believed like two witnesses. So why is it that if one witness now comes and says that this is her husband, in a case where she's shosekes, takes it? It's ein dvarav shel echad makom shnayim. And the Gemara answers, okay, now we start a whole new sugi. We're now talking about a concept called rov deos, which is identified with Rabbi Nechemiah. We're not talking about an eid kosher. Again, an eid kosher who testifies meis bailech, we apply and activate the principle of ula is believed like two eid. But what happens if the eid who testified, aid in inverted commas, who testified that Meis Baila is not really an aid at all because he's Psuli Eidus? So we had one witness who testified that her husband is dead, and now Psuli Eidus, let's say, for example, two women would now testify that her husband is alive. Here's where Shmuel is mechadesh, that we accept the two witnesses who are not really witnesses against the eid kosher. Because whenever we have eidus of eid echad, we apply the principle of rov deos. Kid Rabbi Nechemiah, which we're going to see Rabbi Nechemiah in just a second. So therefore, if she's not machish their testimony, meaning the two witnesses who testify that this is her husband, then in this case, takes it. Why? Because we have two against one. That's called rov deos. If on the other hand, she's machid, she denies it, she says, this is not my husband, she's believed, even against rov deos. And ain't it tzricha lotzes? Because again, the underlying rule here is that ein psule edus ne'emanim lahayid al adam kasher, and it means that psule edus are not believed to testify about someone, even if there are 1,000 of them, because adam ne'eman al atzmo b'surah. If he's absolutely sure, certain, then he's believed. So certainly, Psuli Eidus are not going to trump his own contradictory understanding of the truth. Where is this halach of rov deos? The Sanya we learned in the Brayso of Nechem Yomi Kol Mokum Shemina Tolei Echad halach achar rov deos. When the Torah believes one aid, it's not eidus. It's just an opinion, so to speak. And against that opinion, we have other opinions that contradict that opinion, and we're going to pass him based on rov, even if those other opinions that rov are eidim psulim. And therefore, asu shtei noshim bish echad kishnei anoshim bish echad. Certainly, two men who testify and contradict one man is we believe the two and not the one. So too, if two witnesses contradict the testimony of one man, and these two witnesses are psuli edus and noshim, then aslina basa rov deos, and the two women are believed against the eid echad. And that's called aslina basa rov deos. Now the Gemara offers an alternative understanding of Shmuel. Ibais ema kol hecha di asa eid echad kosher meikara. Now we're reinterpreting Shmuel, that if an eid kosher came first, and we accept his agency as the status, upgraded status of two eidim, is afilu mei anoshim, even 100 witnesses who contradict him, keid echad damyan, they only have the status of one aid. So we're not going to go after rov deos psulos against one aid. If the aid came first and he's kosher, and therefore, if the wife is not makish the rov psulos, I should say even if the wife is not makeshes the rov psulos lo teitze. Why? Because the eid echad who came first to testify that her husband died is believed like two eidim. We upgrade him to the status of two Eidim. But Hacha, in what scenario did Shmuel say that if she's not Machish, Teitze, the Mayas Kinon could go the Asya Yichemei Kara. It wasn't an Eid Kosher who initially testified that Meis Bailah, but rather it was an Isha. And she testified that Meis Bailah Shalisha Zu. Now this woman goes ahead and gets married based on the testimony of a single woman, of one single woman. Now two witnesses come in, and they are Nashim. And they testify that this is her husband. In this case, the Shnios, right, the Shtei Nashim who came subsequently and testified that this is her husband, they believe based on the principle of Rov Deos. Because again, the original aid was not an aid kosher, but rather was an Isha. And once the original aid who said Meis Bailach was an Isha and a Psuli Eidus, then we activate the principle of Rov Deos. And therefore, if she doesn't contradict these two ladies who testify that this is her husband, then Teitze. We have to break up the marriage to the Sheni. Utrotza Rabbi Nechemya Hach. And now we reinterpret the view, the statement, the ruling of Rabbi Nechemya. Which means that we're going to believe Rov Deos, even if they are psulim, psuliedus, the asu shtei nashim, the isha achas. And two ladies came to testify on a particular woman, kishnei anoshim bich echad. And now they have the status of these two women against one woman is like that of two men against one man. And just like two men are believed to testify against one man and be machashim, so too two women are believed against one woman. But if the two ladies are machishos bish echad kosher, they're contradicting one aid who's a kosher, kepalga upalga dami. This one single witness is considered like two witnesses. And now there are two ladies who are testifying that this is a husband, contradicting that one single witness. Even if she's not makish, is lo teitze. Why? Because she relied on the Eid Rishon, who testified that her husband died. And the Torah believed that Eid Rishon like two Eidim. And the psulim are not believed to be machish, the two Eidim ksherim. And no matter how many psulim you gather together to be machish Eid Echad, they're never going to be believed to be machish Eid Echad because he becomes like two Eidim ksherim. The Mishnah says that if the Eidim say that Meis Bailach, and she gets married, and now her husband comes alive, is Sricha get me Bishlema Rishon Tiboy get. I understand that the first husband needs a get. I mean, that's an Eish Raisa. Ela Sheni, but she was never married to the Sheni. Zamai, Znusvi Alma, why does she need a get? Omer of Huna, Zera Shema Yomru, Geresh Zeh, Vinasa Zeh, Vinimtes, Eish Sishotza below get. We're afraid that the onlooker thinks that the first husband must have delivered a get. Otherwise, why is she living with the second husband? So therefore, they think that the marriage to the second husband is perfectly legit. It's not znus. And if she walks out of that marriage from the sheni without a get, is nimtes, it comes out. They're going to say, Eish Yotza below get. Now, I'm not sure what that means. I suggest it means laws. I don't know. Maybe you have a footnote on that. I don't have a note here. In any event, the Gemara asks, Hachi Seifa de Ketani Amru La Meis Bailach. Vinis Kadsha, and she married a second husband. But there was no Nisu, and there was only Kedushin. Her first husband, she can resume the marriage with her first husband. Is Hachanami Nema? Why don't we apply the same kashash with regard to the spectators who are going to think that the first husband must have given her a get, and that's why she married the second one. And Giresh Zeh, the first husband delivered a get for Kidesh Zeh, and the second one was Makadisha. Now they're going to say that what? Nimtze say she below get. If she goes back to resume her marriage with the first husband, how's that possible? She needs a get from her second husband. And where it says Li Olam, buy a get. And it's true that even in the Sefer of the Mishnah, for that same reason, she requires the geti hachi. If that's true, that we're afraid of the roim, of the spectators, then we should be afraid that they might come and say that the first husband gave her a get. She therefore married the second husband. How could she go back to the first husband when the onlooker is going to say that she was divorced by her first husband, she married a second husband, albeit b'nesuin, b'erisin, but nevertheless, after that marriage terminates, she cannot resume her marriage to the first husband. It's krushas alachashe nisis liachet. And the Gemara answers, Kid Rabbi Yossi ben Kipar diomar min an asuin asurim and erisin muteris. When does the Torah prohibit machzik krushas? That's only if she, after she was divorced from her first husband, she married the second husband with Nesuin. But if she only married the second husband with Erisin, then she's allowed, after she receives a get, to remarry her first husband. So the Gemara asks, Hamida Katani Seifa. But in the Seifa of the Mishnah, it says, Afal Pi. And here we're turning to Pei Tesom and Al. Afal Pi Shenosan La Achron Get. It seems that the get that she got to Sheni is a meaningless get. It's not effective. It's not valid. And therefore she can marry a Kohen. Which means that when her husband comes a lot, and now we clarify that she was not Mekudeshes to the Sheni at all, and the Torah in the Isa Grusha Lakoin says, Visha Grusha me Isha, Velo me Isha Ena Isha. This get is not a get at al michlad lo boy get. So we see we don't need a get from the shady even midrabanan. Is the e boy get, because if we're going to say that the rabbanan required a get from the sheni, then am I lo pasal min akuda? That get, at least on the rabbanan level, is a valid get. How could she marry a kohen? She's a grusha. But because of this kasha, the Gemara retracts its original svara, and now the Gemara says that the seifa is a case of niskadshel l'sheni v'eino tzricha get. She doesn't need a get. Ella, the reason why in the seifa she doesn't need a get is amri kedushay tos hapi. The spectator is going to assume that the second marriage was a kedushay tos. Like, for example, he was makadisher on the condition that he's a rich guy, and he's not a rich guy. On the condition that he's a Kohen and he's Israel. So the kedusha of B'Telim, because lo niskayim I get. So the Gemara has to immediately Reisha Nami, even in a case where she was married a full-fledged marriage to the Sheni. Why the Rabbanan worried and requiring a get for the Sheni? Because people will say Yotzis below get. Amri, why don't they say Nisui Tos Havi? And the Gemara answers Kansua Rabbanan. In a case where she had nisuin, that means she had an intimacy with her second husband, then the Rabbanan can impose a knas. And based on the chash of Shemi Yomru Cheish get, they're going to require a get. And they're not going to rely on the fact that the Roim are going to say, oh, she didn't get a get because it was Nisui Tos. It's safer. Now, I to say, why in the case of the Sefer, where there was only Kedushin, why don't we impose this knas and they should require a get from the Sheni? And that's based on the fact that people will say that she's an Eishes Ish, Yotes below get. Why is this Kacha any different? And where it says Reisha of the Yisura, Kansua, say for the law of the Yisura, lo Kansura Rabbanan. When did the Rabbanan institute a knas? When she violated an Isur. there's got to be a Maisa Avera to generate a Knas. And that's going to apply in a case of Nisuin, where she had an intimacy with her second husband. But in the Seifa, there was only Kedushin, there was no intimacy, and therefore she never violated an Isur, and we don't have a Knas that's imposed on someone without a violation of an Isur, as Lokon Surabbanon. This is where we're going to stop on the top of Peites Amud Aleph, Ein La Ksuba. Take this opportunity to wish you a great day, and thanks for giving me the extra time. We really needed it, as you can see.